Welcome everybody to our webinar, From Recovery to COP26, the contribution of sustainable cooling. I'm Dan Hamza-Goodacre with the UN Cool Coalition, the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme, and the COP26 Climate Champions team. So we're here today to talk about sustainable cooling. It's a critical solution to our climate and our development goals, as recognised by the hard work of many of you that have joined us today, as well as by the UN Secretary General, whose 2019 Climate Summit elevated sustainable cooling and launched the Cool Coalition, which I hope many of you countries and organisations will join. We have a wonderful lineup today, so I really want to get started to listen to our speakers. Firstly, it really is a great pleasure to introduce the Right Honourable Lord Zac Goldsmith, Minister of State for the Environment for the UK. Lord Goldsmith has actually made a lifelong contribution to enhancing our precious natural world, and actually personally very much enjoyed reading The Ecologist many years ago while he was editor. In fact, this morning I even managed to dust off a 2002 edition of my bookshelf. Actually, hopefully you can see that, which is incredibly appropriate because it's actually about protecting gorillas, a success story for Rwanda, one of the governments that's joining us today. I also wholeheartedly endorse your Twitter card, Lord Goldsmith. It says sustainable cooling underpins our mission to promote sustainable development around the world. So I encourage our audience, please retweet that far and wide. You can also submit Q&A today in the box. We'll get to that at the very end of the webinar if we have time. If not, then we'll follow up offline. So without further ado, Lord Goldsmith, the Zoom platform is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. I remember putting that edition to bed, as it were, and if only we lived in a world where there was no need for such a magazine, but unfortunately that is not the case. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you're all safe and well in these strange times. COVID-19 has already had an unprecedented impact on the world, and its effects undoubtedly are going to be felt very deeply for very many years to come. I think it's exposed our vulnerabilities on so many levels, and it has almost certainly lowered our collective tolerance for risk. And because this current crisis is itself just the latest symptom of our dysfunctional relationship with the natural world, which we're destroying at pace, devastating ecosystems, destabilizing our climate, plunging some of the world's poorest people into even deeper poverty, this has to be a wake-up call for all of us. There's been a lot of talk about an anthropause for the environment while we've all been in lockdown during this terrible pandemic, but the big picture is nevertheless very, very bleak. The past 5 years have been the warmest on record. Last year was the second hottest ever. More or less this time last year, Britain recorded our hottest temperature on record. In June, in a small town called Verkhoyansk, I hope I pronounced that right, the mercury rose to 38 degrees. Now, Verkhoyansk is in Siberia, which is a terrifying thought. And yesterday I spoke to friends from the UAE, and cooling, not surprisingly, is top of their minds too. But clearly this is everyone's problem. Already over 1 billion people face challenges accessing cooling, and keeping cool isn't just a nice to have, it is critically important, it is essential, and it matters for food and medicines as well. We are, in the UK, we're the largest donor to Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisation. And UK innovation is right now leading solar-powered storage to chill vaccines anywhere in the world. But from a climate change perspective, cooling is becoming more and more important. Delivering cooling can be either a huge part of the problem or a huge part of the solution. For example, by 2050, cooling will require as much electricity as China and India use put together today. So we're going to need a shift towards affordable and crucially sustainable cooling solutions. Just consider food. Specifically the challenge of feeding somewhere around 10 billion people by 2050. Around 400 million tons of food grown today globally require refrigeration. So working with UNEP, 2 British universities and our friends in Rwanda, we'll be establishing an African Centre of Excellence for sustainable cooling and cold chain. And cooling will help Rwandan farmers get produce to market quickly and efficiently, and it'll help boost profits and create jobs. And just as importantly, by cutting food waste, by preventing it from spoiling, we can produce food using less land, which will save more space for nature. So we need to roll out sustainable cooling solutions, and I'm absolutely delighted to be sharing some fresh advice with you today. The UK is a champion member of the UN Cool Coalition, and in partnership with the UK's Carbon Trust and the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme, we've published a sustainable cooling guide that shows what good practice looks like for governments, for businesses, industries, and cities. And it's on the UN Cool Coalition website now. I think it might have just popped up. We know that improving the energy efficiency of cooling could save half a degree of warming by 2100, by 2100. And if you add to that the Kigali Amendment, you could double the gains. But technology, as ever in this battle against climate change, is only one part of the story. If you consider cities, during a heat wave in early June, more than half of the adults in the UK visited a park, seeking the cool sanctuary of green spaces while they're being cooped up under lockdown conditions. And we know from our wonderful ecosystem of conservation groups in the UK that demand for nature during this time has never been higher. In London, we have 1.5 million square meters of green roofs along our skyline. It's a wonderful addition, and across the UK in 2017, we're told that the cooling shade of trees and water saved our country at least £248 million. And globally, we're told $100 million of annual investment in urban tree planting could create enough shade to cut average temperatures by 1 degree for 77 million people. And there's no doubt that cities around the world are already leaning on trees. We're part of the Cities for Forests initiative led by the World Resource Institute, helping Kochi in India make trees part of tackling heat islands and flooding. And we're looking forward to new projects in Madagascar, Brazil, Indonesia, and Mexico. And today's new guide shows how cooling underpins all 5 themes that we've chosen for COP26 next year, which we're going to be hosting alongside Italy, including nature. If you're not part of the Cool Coalition, I very, very strongly urge you to join us. We'll be asking governments to come with ambitious, nationally determined contributions and the determination to achieve cleaner, efficient cooling for all. And we're using this extended run-up to COP26 to build alliances of countries and businesses calling for targets on a whole range of issues, targets to protect land and sea, on supply chains, on land use subsidies, on commitments to net zero emissions, and to dramatically increase support for the cost-effective, nature-based solutions to the major challenges we face, including cooling. This is the moment for a seismic shift. And as we renew and rebuild, as every country in the world is going to have to do on the back of coronavirus, we can now make decisions that turn this experience to the good, by taking this chance to make environmental sustainability and resilience the lens through which we map out a green and fair and resilient recovery. I just want to finish by saying a big thank you for inviting me along today, and I hope these discussions will be fruitful. I'm sure they will be. The Danes are doing some extraordinary work on cooling, so it's a great Ambassador Thomas Anker Christiansen, a climate ambassador for Denmark. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Lord Goldsmith, and congratulations to the UK for leadership on sustainable cooling, both at home and abroad. Please do keep up the good work. We may be handing to the Danish ambassador next, if he's here. If not, we're going to India. So, Ambassador, do we have you online? Gone. Okay, I'll be nimble. Bit of gymnastics. Let's turn to India then. I understand we do have Secretary Gupta with us. I mean, India, a country that absolutely knows firsthand the dangers of rising temperatures. And actually, yesterday I joined the Ashton Awards and was delighted that India's heat action plans won the Cool Cities Award. I was also reminded of the severity of the challenge that's faced. 800 people died in one day back in 2015. It's tragic. Thankfully, the Indian government and other organizations are taking action. In fact, India was the first country in the world to publish a national cooling action plan. This was endorsed, very much welcomed by the UN Secretary General. In fact, he called for other countries to follow India's lead in similarly publishing national cooling action plans. And it's great actually that the Cool Coalition is working with a number of countries, Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme as well, to provide technical assistance, the development of a sort of model national cooling action plans that can be replicated across a broader group of countries. So I'm very pleased that they're helping, but it's going to be wonderful to hear firsthand from Secretary Gupta from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change for the Government of India. Secretary Gupta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, gentlemen. And let me present the perspective, Indian perspective on sustainable cooling, particularly from the recovery point of view of recovery from COVID. We have the cooling arrangement, cooling is required across different sectors of our economy, for residential, for commercial purpose, cold chains, refrigeration, transport, and industry. This is actually an essential part of the economic growth. Sustainable cooling comes at the intersection of three international agreements: Kigali agreements to the Montreal Protocol, Paris Agreement under UNFCCC, and this is also part of the Sustainable Development Goal of 2030. We all know that there is the linkage between cooling and Sustainable Development Goal is by now it is well recognized. For example, SDG 2 on zero hunger, SDG 3 on health and well-being, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, and SDG 13 on climate action are all linked to cooling. Sustainable cooling and provision of thermal comfort for all are the thrust area of the India Cooling Action Plan. There is a strong social dimension that is with access to cooling. The cooling demand in India is expected to grow following the growth trajectory of the economy. This will result in increased use of refrigerant and energy use for cooling. Just after the adoption of Kigali Agreement to Montreal Protocol, it had been realized by us that synergetic action with respect to addressing cooling requirement across sectors will have a higher impact than actions taken in isolation. Immediately, the process for development of integrated national cooling action plan was initiated by India. India became one of the first countries in the world to launch a comprehensive cooling action plan in March 2019, which has a long-term vision to address the cooling requirement across different sectors such as residential, commercial, building, cold chain, refrigeration, transport, and industry. Our action plan that lists out the actions which can help reduce the cooling demand, which will also help in reducing both direct and indirect emissions. These quantifiable goals for reduction in cooling load, energy use, and refrigeration demand. The India Cooling Action Plan factors in energy efficiency of refrigerant and refrigeration and air conditioning equipment and refrigerant transition to enhance the overall climate benefit. Our action plan seeks to address the environmental impact of cooling by a comprehensive outlook encompassing reduction of cooling load across sectors, enhancing efficiency of cooling equipments, use low energy consuming alternative cooling technologies, and the use of technologies such as district cooling and new technologies. This is evident from the short, medium, and long-term recommendations for the space cooling sector, wherein enhancing efficiency of cooling equipment, use low energy consuming alternative cooling technologies, and not in kind technologies have been provided. Our action plan, it seeks to reduce cooling demand across sectors by 20% to 25% by 2037-38, reduce refrigerant demand by 25 to 30% in the same year, and reduce cooling energy requirement by 25 to 40% by the same year. We also recognize cooling and related areas as thrust areas of research under our National Science and Technology Program. One of the main component of our cooling action plan is training and certification of roughly about 100,000 servicing sector technicians by 2022-23, synergizing with Skill India mission. These actions will have significant climate benefits. The action plan has been appreciated internationally as an important policy initiative, which has the potential to provide socio-economic benefit in terms of fulfillment of SDGs, such as zero hunger and health for all, and also have environmental benefit related to reduced energy and refrigerant use. Many countries are involved in development of cooling action plan, keeping in view the significant environmental benefits and the fulfillment of sustainable development. The UN Secretary General in his message on World Ozone Day on 16 September 2019 has highlighted the need for all countries to develop national cooling action plan. Our cooling action plan recommends synergies with ongoing government program and schemes such as Housing for All, the Smart City Mission, Doubling Farmers' Income, and Skill India Mission in order to maximize socio-economic co-benefits. The following benefits would accrue to the society over and above the environmental benefits by the implementation of ICAP: thermal comfort for all, sustainable cooling, doubling farmers' income, skilled workforce for better livelihood and environmental protection, Make in India, and robust R&D on alternative cooling technologies. Our ministry has already taken a step to operationalize the recommendation given in ICAP along with concerned line ministries and government organizations, industry, think tanks, and academia. The steering committee and thematic working group that have been constituted for providing the modalities for operationalization of recommendations have already commenced their work. Actually, one of the main focus and the main strength of our cooling action plan is the coming together of all stakeholders, the think tanks, industry, the government organizations, and international organizations. A report by Sustainable Energy for All on providing sustainable cooling for all shows that globally there are over 1.1 billion people living in hot climate who face immediate risk from lack of access to cooling. These includes people in poor rural areas who do not have access to safe food and medicines, and people in poor urban slums with little or no cooling to protect them against extreme heat waves. Closing these cooling access gap of vulnerable population is essential for economic growth and development. We are in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. Globally, COVID-19 has impacted all spheres of human activity, more so the vulnerable section of the society. The lockdown has posed unforeseen challenges before the society. Issues particularly associated with public health, resilient infrastructure, and ensuring livelihood have come to fore. COVID-19 has thrown up new challenges for a country of the size and scale of India. It has made us again realize the importance of self-reliance and resilience. Resilient infrastructure necessarily include affordable housing, supply chain logistics and cold chain, transport, manufacturing, and livelihood. Cooling is intrinsic to all these. Within the domain of ICAP, it is important to move towards energy efficient technologies and prevent locking into the obsolete technologies while addressing the cooling needs. This should include a mix of refrigerant based, non-refrigerant based, and not in kind technologies such as district cooling. The ICAP also envisages the use of renewable and alternative energy technologies in the cold chain sector. This would allow us to move forward in sustainable cooling in post-COVID-19 scenario, securing both environmental and societal benefit. So this is the action plan which we have prepared for ourselves, and we are open and we invite that any country which is in need of our help through which we have developed this action plan, we are willing to offer our help and expertise in developing the action plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry Gupta, including for that kind offer to collaborate with other countries around the world as we all build back better from COVID-19. And really congratulations for, there's a lot of work there. Congratulations for all of that work. I hope that together with India, donor governments and international organizations and foundations can bring cooling to all in India, especially the most vulnerable, and that India can bounce back from COVID-19 as quickly as possible. So many thanks. Okay, let's turn to another country in the Sustainable Cooling Leadership Group, and that's Denmark. From district cooling systems, they also have a lot of district heating systems, to cutting super polluting F-gases, and to leading industries for air conditioners and refrigerators such as Danfoss. There is a lot going on in Denmark. Denmark's also the co-lead of the energy transition track. And thank you very much again, Denmark. You helped facilitate the Cool Coalition and also other partnerships that made the Secretary General's Summit last year such a success. And you've committed to carry on that leadership in support of SDG 7, which is critical, as we know, for our climate goals and for our development goals, making sure we leave nobody behind, which is now more important than ever. So to help with that task, the Danish government has appointed Ambassador Thomas Anker Christensen, and we are delighted that he has joined us today. So Ambassador, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much, Dan, and apologies for a slight delay, but
no problem.
When you're working from your sort of home office, things fall upon you, as I'm sure you all know. So we're happy to be with you, and hope that we can very soon gather physically again. And there's something about human interaction over a screen that I'm sure we're all getting very tired of. It saves us a lot of air miles and CO2 emissions, but at the same time, I do think we are social beings, and we actually develop our thinking and our doing by getting together. So looking forward to that, and thank you for inviting Denmark to join this extremely important event. When we locked down a few months ago, we were just ramping off on ambition for Glasgow and for COP26, and I am personally extremely touched and sorry by what COVID-19 has done to everyone, and I listened very carefully to my Indian colleague and about India's ambitions to tackle this crisis, and you have all my sympathy, Minister, for what India is going through, and so does everyone else on this call. We think that it is extremely important as we try to recover, try to get that build back better that you mentioned, Dan, into shape, that we do that while keeping climate ambition and the need actually to build ambition in mind. And our Minister for Development is now talking about building back better and greener. That's the way he's coining it, because this current global crisis is disruptive in every sense. Hundreds of millions have lost their jobs and their livelihoods. And it is actually a once-in-a-generation chance to change gear, to move to where we want to, and to use the post-crisis situation to redouble our efforts to actually do so in a green and pro-climate way. So the short-term recovery measures have to lead to medium and long-term strategies, to ambitious NDCs that will also make us achieve the SDGs and Paris. And for that, energy transition is key and cooling is key. Each year, we invest millions of dollars in renewable energy and energy flexibility. And we know that every million invested creates 25 jobs. Every million invested in energy efficiency creates about 10 jobs. And energy transition can achieve net job gains in all regions of the world, also where fossil fuel jobs are now concentrated. And I think, we should use that momentum to promote human health and build resilience. Cooling is critical to strengthening resilience in both housing, agriculture, food, health. It can reduce food loss by 20% and feed 500 million people, according to FAO. It's vital for cold chains and health facilities. And WHO's manifesto on 6 prescriptions for healthy and green recovery from COVID includes investments in energy transition, essential services, sustainable food systems, livable cities, and indeed also sustainable cooling is important to each of these areas. Heating and cooling account for about 55% of global energy consumption in buildings. CO2 emissions from space cooling have tripled over the last 30 years, and up to 40% of energy consumption in Asia is attributed to commercial buildings. And it's simply a smart place to invest to create jobs, increase productivity, health, and combat climate change at the same time. Energy efficiency in buildings is part of our national recovery strategy. We are investing billions of dollars in that in Denmark, and it's also a central part of the EU's Green Deal. We have adopted during lockdown a new climate law that sets our national target of emissions reductions to 70% by 2030. That includes a total decarbonization of our energy system, full electrification of the economy, and major investments in innovation and capacity building, including so-called power to X and hydrogen. In Denmark, cooling plays a small role. We're a cool country, cold country. But as you said, Dan, we have a lot of district heating. We use cooling mainly for industrial purposes, mostly based on electricity supplied by renewables. But we also see that as global warming also hits our shores, there's a demand for air conditioning in office spaces that is growing. There's an interest in exploring to do district cooling based on our district heating potential. And district cooling uses a variety of natural cooling sources. It can be produced in an energy efficient and climate-friendly way and be supplied through pipes, for example, for office spaces and hospitals. And the government of Denmark is working to implement a political agreement to promote district cooling even further. You referred the Cool Coalition that was launched at the Climate Summit and the Energy Transition Track at that summit. Both the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen are actually cool champions. And we really support this push to have cooling put firmly on the international agenda. So when we look forward to COP26, we think that the multiple benefits of sustainable cooling should be further documented, concrete policy options on target setting, standards, requirements for energy efficiency and cooling as part of energy transition strategies and NDCs are key. We should look for targets that increase transparency, predictability, and guidance for private companies and investors that allow for progress on cooling to be measured. So with that, good luck with this session, with putting cooling on the global agenda. And Denmark stands fully ready to continue working in this direction. We are indeed supporting and committed to the Cool Coalition. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Some really powerful statistics there, actually, action to be taken. I encourage everybody who's listening in to tweet and share some of those statistics that you just relayed. Thank you also, Denmark, for your work generally and leadership on climate, and of course your support for the Cool Coalition. We look forward to carrying on collaborating with you on the road to Glasgow, and yeah, keep playing it cool, keep Denmark cool, as you just said. Okay, now it's time for your daily dose of analytics, and who best to bring you that than the Economist Intelligence Unit for insights into economic, political and business affairs. So we will shortly hear from Jonathan Birdwell, Regional Director at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Jonathan and the team at EIU have been looking at stimulus packages and climate change. They'll also share a slide about the most successful climate policies ever, which is very thought-provoking. So now I've hopefully built some suspense. Jonathan, the punchline is yours. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dan. Good morning to all of our distinguished guests and everyone tuning in. It is an honor to present to you today as part of London Climate Action Week. For those of you who don't know the Economist Intelligence Unit, we are the research arm of the Economist newspaper, and we work on a range of global public policy issues, often connected to the Sustainable Development Goals, including many projects on sustainability. And readers of the Economist newspaper will know that in May, the cover of the newspaper called for policymakers to seize the moment provided by the COVID-19 pandemic to, quote, flatten the climate curve. So we believe that in addition to the moral imperative to take action on climate change, there's also a very strong economic imperative. At the EIU, we've been working with Dan and the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program to assess the case for cooling against the backdrop of the economy. As Dan said, the focus of my presentation today is going to be on the economic benefits of a green recovery, and in particular, how energy efficiency and cooling can achieve both climate and economic goals in response to the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So firstly, just to give some context, the lockdown responses to the COVID-19 pandemic has cut global economic growth dramatically, with the latest EIU forecasts predicting global output to contract by 4.8% this year. The lockdown measures have also led to a substantial fall in emissions, an expected drop of 8% compared to 2019. Now, while this is certainly a notable reduction, it is nowhere near what is needed to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, because of course warming depends on cumulative emissions to date. So to achieve that target, global emissions would have to decline by about that same amount or just under every year from 2020 to 2030. So even a global slowdown on the scale that we have seen is not enough. Climate change is much too large to be solved by the abandonment of planes, trains, and automobiles. Next slide, please. But with every crisis, and especially the current one, there is an opportunity. And we have seen in response to the pandemic, governments and financial institutions really unleash the full force of their spending powers, which in May was estimated that $9 trillion had been spent on stimulus packages. This, of course, presents an opportunity for governments to take action on climate. Firstly, because climate policies can create jobs. This is, of course, a strong selling point at a time when unemployment in many countries is at an all-time high. For example, in France, the EIU forecasts that unemployment will rise sharply in 2020 to just over 10%, and we expect this to continue to rise until mid-2021, and we forecast similar measures, or similar numbers rather, for the UK as well. Secondly, it can be done now at a lower political cost. As a result of the lockdown, businesses at the heart of the fossil fuel economy are shrinking their long-term capacity and employment and may be looking to governments for support. So there's a strong argument for introducing climate-related conditions to any support provided. Low energy prices also make it easier to cut fossil fuel subsidies. And then thirdly, there's a lower financial cost at the moment, as the cost of borrowing is so low and is likely to stay that way for the foreseeable future. So installing renewables should stay cheaper for longer. Slide, please. So looking back at previous crises, and in particular 2008 and 2009, similar calls were made with some action taken. So about 1/8 of the stimulus funding provided by the Obama administration's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act went into clean energy loans and investments. And while there was a small decline in 2009 in worldwide CO2 emissions from fossil fuels by about 1.4%, by the end of 2010, annual emissions were greater than they had ever been. And this increase was due to many factors, including the rapid growth of large emerging economies, notably China and India, and the fact that China's post-crisis stimulus relied on ramping up coal-fired power stations, as well as stimulus packages promoting carbon-intensive industries such as construction. Same time, one of the other factors was that green investment was really at that stage, it was still in early stage renewables, so it was taking time to feed in through to emissions. Next slide, please. Today, though, is very different to 2009, and there are reasons to be more hopeful. Firstly, the speed and magnitude of the government response to the COVID crisis has been much greater than the global financial crisis. So there's a greater scope for change. Governments should also have confidence that climate policies are more likely to succeed. Firstly, renewables are in a very different place to where they were. So you can see in the chart, costs have fallen significantly. They're now more widely deployed than they were in 2009, and there is also greater lobbying power. Secondly, the political and consumer sentiment is now more favorable to a green economy. Politics has changed following the Paris Agreement in 2015. We've seen huge green gains, party gains in Germany last year and just last week in municipal elections in France. We see non-state actors are engaging too, so cities, businesses, investors, States and regions have all signed up to the race to zero, but also significant majorities of citizens want politicians to prioritize climate change now. So a survey in April by Ipsos Mori found that nearly 2/3 of respondents globally said it was important that government actions aimed at economic recovery should prioritize action on climate change. Another reason why today is different to 2009 is that the need to address climate change is even more urgent. So more research has now been carried out since 2009. People are more aware of the climate crisis and its social impact. The problem is becoming more and more urgent. And take cooling, for example. So cooling, already a substantial user of energy, is on a rapid growth trend, driven by climate change, urbanization, and income growth. The EIU estimated that 4.8 billion new units of cooling equipment will be sold globally between 2019 and 2030. And cooling, of course, contributes to emissions both directly and indirectly. And thus, as demand increases, the need for climate-friendly options is as important as ever. Next slide, please. So what should governments consider when designing green recovery packages? Well, there are sector-specific opportunities. So if we take the power sector and its end users, there are opportunities from transport to buildings to industry. There are opportunities that can have cross-sector impact, including infrastructure, energy efficiency, education, and innovation. And then there are different methods of implementation to consider: financing via loans or grants, incentivizing markets through tax credits or subsidies, for example, as we've seen in France with the extension of rooftop solar PV subsidies to households, or providing directly through government ownership, for example, projects such as grid updates or carbon capture and storage systems. Alternatively, governments might consider introducing new regulation. Next slide, please. So with those options, how should governments go about prioritizing policies and actions to include in stimulus packages? Well, first, of course, there must be an assessment of the climate benefit of different policy options. So does policy support the pathway to zero emissions? But the reason we're here today as the Economist Intelligence Unit is really to make the economic case. So any investment option should also be reviewed against criteria for economic growth. Based on our analysis, we identify 4 criteria that policy should meet to ensure their short and medium economic benefit alongside climate benefit. So firstly, job creation. How many jobs will be created per sum of money spent? Secondly, is there a multiplier effect? In other words, will the investment spur additional increases in spending that stimulate the economy? Thirdly, the time it will take to impact the economy. Are programs shovel ready? Can they be rolled out immediately? Can they have an immediate effect on job creation and economic growth? And finally, ability to implement. Are the skills in place to carry out these programs? Is training needed? Will the programs provide jobs for the workers that are displaced? Are supply chains in place? Now, of course, these are not the only criteria that are relevant to what to include in stimulus packages. There are also social considerations. For example, will measures exacerbate or alleviate inequality and social exclusion? But lastly, policymakers must recognize that they cannot solve everything on climate through stimulus packages. For instance, now may not be the time to introduce stricter reporting standards on emissions, as these will not stimulate the economy. However, policymakers can introduce conditions in stimulus packages that lay the foundations for longer-term changes. Next slide, please. So as Dan mentioned, looking back, which policies have historically had the most success for the climate? Well, a study carried out by The Economist back in 2014 assessed different policy options on their ability to reduce emissions by policies and actions. And you can see that international treaties like the Montreal Protocol and renewable energy production have shown the biggest impact. These, of course, cannot be brought in overnight. We also see interesting effects from China's one-child policy, scoring highly, though, of course, we are not advocating for this. What's interesting, though, is that outside of global treaties and energy production, energy efficiency, so all of those highlighted in light blue on the slide, can have a sizable impact on CO2 emissions. Next slide, please. So how does energy efficiency perform against our criteria? And what do we mean by energy efficiency policies? Well, this could include anything from improving industrial energy efficiency, policies to retrofit buildings or more efficient household appliances from clothes dryers to dishwashers. And having noted the climate benefit of these types of policies, what is the economic benefit? Next slide, please. So in terms of job creation, what we see is that an analysis by one source from 2017 found that energy efficiency creates 77 jobs per every $10 million in spending, compared to just 27 jobs for the same amount of spending on fossil fuels. The IEA estimates the effect is even higher, between 100 and 150 jobs for every $10 million spent. How does it perform on the multiplier effect? Well, for context first, a multiplier of 1.5 to 2 is considered high and means that for every dollar spent by the government, $1.50 to $2 is then spent in the economy. So as you can see in the slide here, energy efficiency policies that we outline score highly on this, according to an analysis by McKinsey. And you can see through thinking about the fact that a more efficient appliance means less money has to be spent on energy bills, which can either then be spent by the consumer or the government to boost the economy further. Next slide, please. Additionally, programs can be rolled out quickly. So existing efficiency programs, for example, can be rapidly expanded. New projects can be shovel-ready within weeks or months. According to the IEA, targeting support to social housing and government buildings in the first instance could help kickstart efficiency improvement works, creating then a pipeline of projects for the industry. Compared to infrastructure projects, which can take years of planning, programs can also be rolled out relatively easily. So the skill requirements are generally low. For instance, wall installation requires less training compared to solar installation. Slide, please. So what about policies on sustainable cooling? Well, the EIU team launched a report last autumn with the cooling efficiency program entitled The Cooling Imperative, which outlined the social and climate benefits that efficient cooling brings, from healthcare to food storage. And this includes everything from equipment replacement, retrofits, smart system cooling appliances, and green shading. So many of the same measures that we see with energy efficiency more broadly. And in terms of the climate benefit, we know that from the IEA, that annual global CO2 emissions from space cooling are forecast to double by 2050 without energy efficiency measures. However, energy efficient air conditioners will keep emission levels similar to annual levels today. Looking at the economic impact, there's less data specifically focused on cooling. But given that cooling efficiency is a subset of energy efficiency and involves many of the same policies that we saw with energy efficiency, we would expect these policies to really perform similarly economically as the data suggests with respect to energy efficiency more broadly. Next slide, please.
Jonathan, can I just do a like a 1 minute warning to wrap up so we can get on?
Yeah, coming to the end. Thank you very much, Dan. So as Dan mentioned, we've been busy reviewing stimulus packages to date and looking to see to what extent they include opportunities for energy efficiency and cooling. We've reviewed over 350 stimulus packages. 87% of those were short-term rescue packages. And we found that just under 7% could be said to encourage energy efficiency, but really that depends on how they're rolled out. Unfortunately, none appear to include measures targeting sustainable cooling. Now, of course, there are some countries that are making real efforts. We heard from the ambassador of Denmark. We see that Denmark had launched a program focused on green renovation of public housing, worth over 30 billion Danish kroner, or 1.3% of Denmark's 2019 GDP. So although we haven't seen many measures to date yet in stimulus packages, there is hope. Do not lose hope. Longer term recovery packages are still on the way. As we know from the UK announcement of a recovery plan recently, governments are thinking about this and they must act fast to ensure recovery packages address opportunities like energy efficiency and cooling. So last slide, please. To conclude, crises create a unique opportunity to steer the economy away from carbon. Governments should prioritize climate-friendly investments that meet necessary economic criteria. Energy efficiency, and by extension, sustainable cooling, score highly against these criteria and should be high on government's priority lists. And while stimulus packages to date have not incorporated these opportunities, they still can and must in order to benefit both the climate and the economy. So with that, I thank you all very much. Pass back over to Dan, and if there's any interest, please do get in touch if you want to learn more about our work on cooling or climate change more broadly. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Very useful to have some analytics to guide us. And I mean, the good news is that we know what can work. I guess the less good news is that we're not doing enough of it. But there's some great opportunities in there, and we are going to hear from 4 governments now who are all actually paying attention to your analysis in different ways and to different degrees. So delighted to be joined by our panelists. We have 4 countries. I will introduce them now, and then we'll go through each in turn with 1 question for sure, 2 if we have time. So delighted to introduce Kate Hughes, Director, International Climate Change, Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in the UK. Also Francesco Gaeta, the Director of European and International Affairs in the Ministry for the Ecological and Inclusive Transition in France. That's a wonderful name for a ministry. We are also joined by our colleagues in Rwanda, Faustin Munyazikwiye. I hope I have pronounced your surname right, Faustin, the Deputy Director General, the Rwandan Environment Management Authority in the Ministry of Environment. And then last but by no means least, Ngayen Cook, the National Ozone Coordinator and the Deputy Head of Division of Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reduction and Ozone Layer Protection in the Department of Climate Change, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment from Vietnam. That is a very long title. I hope that fits on your business card, Ngayen. Your business card is probably rather large. Okay, so let's get going. We're going to start with a fairly general question, which is really for you to share the actions that your government is taking to support sustainable cooling. And if you can give us an insight into why, what's the motivation? Kate, you are first up, and you have the added challenge of augmenting what your minister has already shared, but you've been a climate champion for many years, so I am sure you will manage that. Kate, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dan, for that introduction and that challenge. And yes, we're very lucky that you've already heard from Lord Goldsmith as our minister, who is incredibly passionate about our action in this area. And a huge thank you to you, Dan, to the Cool Coalition, to fellow panelists and the speakers so far for really sort of setting this really fascinating topic up and setting out the context and the challenges for us so clearly. And Lord Goldsmith earlier did give some really powerful figures on increasing cooling demand and the challenges that presents to us. And that rising demand makes early intervention incredibly crucial to ensure that this growth happens in a sustainable way and that cooling products are as energy efficient as possible. And we just heard some more about the importance and the detail of how that can work. I thought it was useful to touch on some of the work that the UK is doing domestically, but also what this means in terms of our COP26 presidency and how we're approaching these issues from that perspective as well. And our work for COP26 is clear. Addressing this topic is absolutely critical. And the guide that we launched today sets out how cooling is important to a huge cross-cutting section of the key campaigns and themes that we're working on for COP26, and how cooling fits within our work on nature-based solutions, on energy transitions, on finance, on adaptation resilience, and on clean transport. And I think it's quite incredible how we think about this as being such a cross-cutting issue touching all of those areas. So I'll say a little bit more about that as we go through, but I just wanted to focus clearly on 3 areas of cooling today. So a little bit about what we're doing in the UK on tackling direct emissions of HFC refrigerants used in cooling equipment. Secondly, on our work internationally to promote access to clean, efficient cooling. And thirdly, a little bit about our work to promote innovation and the role of industry, and also on nature solutions as well. Some of that I might pick up later on in the discussions as well. And I'm being told that maybe you can't hear me that well, so I'll try and speak a little bit more into the microphone. So hopefully that works a little bit.
That's okay, Kate.
Great. So first of all, let's just say a little bit about F-gases and HFC refrigerants. And looking back, the UK was one of the first countries in the world to ratify the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. And there was some interesting graphs just now that I think we all saw about the huge impact that that had. And we support countries taking early action to transition straight from ozone depleting substances to climate-friendly alternatives to HFCs. Here in the UK, under the UK's and EU's world-leading F-gas regulation, we started reducing our use of HFCs earlier and faster than Kigali, as well as extending controls to pre-charged equipment and imposing strict controls on the handling of HFCs throughout their life cycle. We're going to be reviewing our domestic F-gases regulation by the end of 2022 to see how we can go even further to help meet the UK's net zero target by 2050. And internationally, the UK government is providing over $3 million to the World Bank and UNEP on a project to accelerate the climate benefits of that Kigali phase down in developing countries. Secondly, let me just say a little bit about product efficiency and our work on COP26 as well, and particularly the energy efficiency of cooling equipment. We know that most air conditioners and refrigerators are sold way below their technical potential for efficiency. So for COP26, we really want to use this opportunity to raise international action on this important area of product efficiency. And we want to eliminate the least efficient products from the global market. And we want to achieve coordination across countries to bring these benefits together much more quickly. To do this, we'll be working closely with the IEA and our co-leads of the Super Efficient Equipment and Appliance Deployment Initiative, which is quite a name, or SEED initiative for short, and to coordinate the regional and global marketplace for these high efficiency products. And as we establish that pathway to COP, and as we take into account the international response to COVID as well, we want to mobilise support for this initiative and action on energy efficiency. It's critical to meeting both those challenges. So if you want to know more, please do get in touch. We really want to work in collaboration with as many partners as possible on that work. And third, let me just say a little bit before I finish on this section on industry engagement, which is really critical to achieving net zero and our ambitions here in cooling. Last Friday, it was World Refrigeration Day, and this is sort of a UK-led initiative, and we participated in many of the hundreds of events globally around the theme of cold chain for life. I think there's a huge amount of interest generated from this event, and the UK-based Secretariat is planning on hosting an independent forum for connecting those interested parties so they can continue to work together on sustainable cold chains, reducing food loss and waste, and decarbonising heating and heat networks. So if you're interested, please contact the organisers who can point you in the right direction. So in summary, yeah, look, there's a huge potential to do more. The UK is doing a lot both domestically and in our work for COP26. We can see the huge changes to global emissions and how important it is to people's lives, how they live, the food they eat, their healthcare. And that's committed to the core coalition and its work. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kate. Challenge met, I think. Definitely very helpful to hear you join the dots between cooling and other critical goals on the climate and energy side and beyond, because cooling can sort of be invisible, and you know, it's a critical part of how we get to zero in a socially sort of equitable way. And the way you made the join the dots with the COP was very helpful as well, and that's also in the briefing note that the government's just launched. So encourage everybody to go and have a look at that. Okay, next up we've got Francesco, who is going to give us an overview of the efforts that the French government is taking. Francesco, hopefully the microphone's going to work from you. Pleasure.
So good morning, everybody. And first of all, I would like to thank the UK government and the Cool Coalition that we know very well for the invitation to speak during this panel. As a matter of fact, it's for us an opportunity to share views on the transition of the cooling sector, in particular during this challenging time. The reason why we put a strong attention on this issue is that we consider that a smart transition of the cooling sector can avoid up to zero 1.8 degrees Celsius on global warming by the end of the century. That's our cap. Every fraction of the degree counts to reach the Paris Agreement objectives. As the others already said, France also is very committed to make the cooling sector greener and more efficient. At the domestic level, in addition to the European regulation, which is our framework in this domain, we have put in place provision to foster the deployment of alternatives, for instance, with economic incentives such as tax advantages. We have also reinforced cooperation with the customs, which is a very sensitive issue, as you know, to fight against illegal trade of HFCs. On energy efficiency, we promote energy saving certificates, the labeling, the eco-design of cooling equipment. Good services and regular controls are also key to reduce energy consumptions and leakages. Improving the energy efficiency of equipment is useless if we do not improve the energy efficiency of buildings. This is an issue for us. To reduce cooling needs, we need smart building design, thermal renovation, natural-based solutions with more nature in cities, and also education to explain how to use wisely the air conditioning. We will have in the European framework a very huge action on that, and we will participate in the framework of the recovery plan. I will have maybe the opportunity to come back to that. At the international level, we have, of course, the Kigali Amendment on the HFCs. At the moment, 97 parties have ratified the amendment, which is nearly 50%. So we would like to encourage the remaining countries to ratify it as soon as possible, that it can be enforced. On the energy efficiency side, during the G7 presidency that we had in last year, France launched the Biarritz Pledge for fast action on efficient cooling, with the associated initiative on efficient cooling under the Climate and the Clean Air Coalition. Now, both the Biarritz Pledge and the CCAC initiative aim to share lessons, facilitate market penetration, and identify additional financing for improvements in energy efficiency in the cooling sector. We are also very committed on buildings decarbonization through our engagement in the Global Alliance for Buildings and Constructions. Some other panelists had the opportunity to mention it. There are many opportunities on cooling, and would like for sure to continue working closely with UK, in particular with the COP26 campaign, and also with Rwanda and India. And we would be honored if Vietnam could join to put the cooling sector on the track.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Francesco. And great to hear everything you've been doing so far. Last year was a busy year for the French government. Thank you very much for your leadership there and your invitation to collaborate with other countries, because we're not going to solve this huge challenge by ourselves. So next up is Faustin, very much an active country in helping us to get on the right pathway towards zero for F-gases with the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. I know lots of things have been going on in Rwanda, so Faustin, very pleased to hand over to you. The Zoom platform is yours. Faustin, yeah, can you?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much, Dan, for giving me the floor. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the government of UK for organizing the London Climate Action Week, and also for organizing and inviting government of Rwanda in this event. As far as the actions government of Rwanda is taking to support the transition to sustainable cooling, both domestically and internationally, Rwanda, first of all, let me start with responding why do we think this is an area deserving of the attention to support. First of all, the cooling sector is expected to grow rapidly worldwide, including in Rwanda. It is expected that space cooling, which is already the biggest consumer of the household energy globally, will double by 2050. So this is a wake-up call that we need to give this cooling sector the importance it deserves. Secondly, on the actions we are taking as a government of Rwanda, first of all, the government of Rwanda developed the national cooling strategy, which provides the context and identifies priority interventions to optimally address Rwanda's growing needs for space conditioning and refrigeration, jointly referred as cooling, in keeping with Rwanda's green growth pathway. So in this national cooling strategy, we are mainly focusing on various key areas which are mainly developing maps. Cooling strategy includes minimum energy performance standards and labels for ACs and refrigerators that will start to be into force in January 2021. So we have been working with together with various entities in the government of Rwanda, including Rwanda Standard Board, including the Ministry of Infrastructure, so that energy efficiency through maps can be enforced since January 21. Indeed, we are also focusing on awareness campaign. As you all know, an awareness campaign is very important, not only for users, but also for various decision makers in different institutions. So an awareness campaign is being carried out to sensitize the public of the new regulations, the financing mechanism, the benefits of the efficiency. But awareness campaign cannot be alone without putting the efforts together with developing capacity of various interveners. So the capacity building also to suppliers and policy implementers to ensure smooth entry into force of the maps has been going on, and we are keeping intensifying the program even after the COVID, even during the pandemic. We are using digital means, but also social distancing to convey the message and build the capacity of various people. So we are using TV and radio shows. We are using public gatherings such as Umuganda. Before COVID, in Rwanda we have a tradition of having community work at the last weekend of the month, and we call it Umuganda, where we convey the message when people are gathered. So we have been using that, and we will continue to use it so that it can have an impact. Another area we are focusing on is on financing mechanisms. In our national cooling strategy, we are aiming to have on-bill financing, which is the financing mechanism which will allow end user to access high efficient products and pay them back through their utility bill. On another hand, we are also emphasizing on LISA, which this mechanism allows big consumers to lease equipment, eliminating need for loan securities and high upfront capital. So this financing mechanism is very important for us, for our citizens to embrace, or we are intending to do, be it in the cooling sector, but also in the energy efficiency battle. Last but not least, we are also focusing on cold chain in partnership with the UNEP, UK, DEFLA, University of Birmingham, and Rwanda Environment Management Authority. A center of excellence in cold chain is in discussion to be established. The center will help to develop post-harvest technologies, business models, technicians to ensure reliability of the cold chain of food and medicine. As you all know, partnership is very important, and we are eager to benefit from the center. So what are we doing at international level? In Rwanda, we have submitted our updated national determined contribution last month as the first country in Africa to submit the updated NDC. And our NDC is very clear on reduction of emissions, where we are targeting to reduce 38% of our emissions by 2030. And indeed, the cooling sector is will play a key role in the mitigation actions stipulated in that NDC. Indeed, at international level as well, we have ratified the Kigali Amendment, and we are encouraging the remaining countries also to do so, so that we can join our hands and achieve the target of Kigali Amendment on Montreal Protocol. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Faustin. There's so much going on. Congratulations on all of that, the domestic and the international level. I'm actually particularly struck by your efforts to roll out on-bill financing, which really is one of the opportunities to recognize the payback that energy efficiency provides. You know, there's often an upfront cost, your capital expenditure, but you can pay that back with some of the operational savings. But someone has to come in and help. Typically, it doesn't always happen by itself. So well done for identifying on-bill financing, and I hope that policy effort proves successful, and that you're able to share that across Africa and frankly beyond. So once again, many thanks.
Thank you.
Our last panelist on this first round is Nguyen from Vietnam. Nguyen, hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully the microphone will work for you. Over to you.
It's working, right? You hear me?
Perfect. Yeah, I can hear you. A little bit quiet. Maybe just come a bit closer, but otherwise.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I will speak louder. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to speak here today. I'd like to thank the UK government, the Secretariat of Coalition, and UNEP for organizing this event. So sustainable cooling has been an important agenda discussed in a lot of different forums. It is crucial for people's health and for achievement of the sustainable goals development. So in Vietnam, it is not only about the thermal comfort, but also about protecting vulnerable populations, keeping food fresh from farm to fork, and productive forces. So this summer, we have to suffer from simultaneous hot weather, exceeding 40 degrees Celsius. Some firms actually they have to adjust their working hours to protect employees' health and mobilize the medical team ready in case of sunstroke. So actually the farmers have to work at night to avoid, which will reduce half of their full capacity. And the situation will continue like us until half of this month, or even longer in some part of the countries. So this is just an examples to show the heat wave that affects our life. Not only the farmers, but also a lot of other people, like the elderly people and those who do not have access to cooling. So the demand, on the other way around, the demand for air conditioner increased dramatically. I can tell you that a statistic that done in 2018 in Vietnam that show the AC market in Vietnam has the annual growth rate of 25% in the past 5 years, which is a quite good business, isn't it? And if the situation is keeping moving in this direction, with a rise for Celsius by 2100, then probably our farmers will work at night and spending their daytime at home suffering from the heat or rushing buying the aircon and will contributing greatly to the global warming. Just to show that it's a fact that might come in the future. And in order to tackle the issue, we're really in need of a transition to sustainable cooling. And but why at the same time the world is taking actions on phasing down the HFC under the Kigali Amendment to Montreal Protocol, we also implementing a number of actions at multiple levels. The National Energy Efficiency Management Plan is underway with support of KSET and World Bank, which is leading by Monterey and MOIT. So we're hoping that by the end of this year or early next year, we're going to have a management plan that will be contributing to submit to the government for implementation in a whole range. Also, in terms of energy efficiency, there are a lot of programs being implemented by the government, taking actions by different necessary steps to join the Cool Coalition, which aim to enhance our understanding, knowledge, and broaden cooperations with other countries, agencies, and organizations. I'm very happy to a lot of countries that are a bit further ahead, and hopefully that we can have some experience to learn. So in terms of sustainable cooling, urban cooling is taken as one of our priority as well. The mitigation potential for this is not fully recognized, but we would like to further explore and to enhance the overall energy efficiency and mitigation ambitions of our NDC as a support to that. So that we are working now with UNEP and GGI to leverage the potential of urban cooling solutions. Doesn't mean to tackle the challenge. So for that reason, I think that sustainable cooling really deserves the attention and support to contribute to effective implementation of our NDC target, and also allowing us to deliver some of the SDG that the country is a member to, is committed to. How about that? I'm still connected.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Ngoyan, and well done for managing the technical problems. Once again, congratulations. There's a lot going on in Vietnam, and thank you for flagging the need for behavior change with the example you gave of changing the hours for workers. We won't get to zero emissions without some behavior change, not just in cooling, but also in other areas. So very much look forward to seeing the National Cooling Action Plan published, and look forward to your collaboration in the Cool Coalition. Looking at the clock, we absolutely need to leave time for the UN Assistant Secretary General, who I understand has been up since 5:30. So I need to be strict on the timekeeping. We won't have time to go back round for for a second round of comments, but I do understand that our colleagues from France, Francesco, have a couple of announcements to make. So we're very pleased just to hand the floor back to Francesco to make those announcements. Francesco, thank you very much. Back to you. I think you're on mute, I think, Francesco, or not. Can we hear you?
Try again. It's okay?
Yes, we have you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a few words, because there are some elements that we would share before the end of the panel. In particular, the fact that we have many opportunities that are highlighted in the UK Guide on Sustainable Cooling, and also in the brief prepared by the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, that can support a clear, resilient recovery. I would just stress that building on this work, the CCAC Efficient Cooling Initiative is currently working with the Cool Coalition to highlight inspiring examples from countries, cities, and the private sector. And I must say that the today's discussion seems to be very valuable input for this document, and we would be happy to count on all participants as contributor. And then last news from France, from the financing point of view, I would just to highlight that we have launched a call for projects in the framework of the French Facility for Global Environment. And this call is aimed at supporting innovation in sustainable refrigeration and air conditioning in developing countries, in particular in Africa. The French facility contribution for this call will range between €500,000 and €3 million per project, and it is open until October 2020. So thank you very much for the exchange, very valuable for us, and I hope that it can be a way to pave the way towards the COP26. That for that we have a big expectation for sure. I think that such ambition needs to be reflected in our enhanced NDC and long-term strategy expected this year. We are looking forward to continuing working with you on cooling. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. That's exactly what we want to hear. Thank you, France. We look forward to working with you on that guide and then to publishing that, sharing that around as widely as we can, and helping make an impact. And thank you. That generous offer of support will also help to socialize that around so that the generous offer from the French government can make the maximum impact. I understand, Kate, you have a tweet-sized contribution to share before we pass on to the Assistant Secretary General. So, Kate, go on, back to you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I just wanted to come in really quickly to say thank you very, very much. We were going to talk about nature-based solutions and innovation and how important they are to this whole agenda as well. But I just wanted to finish off our comments by saying that we are keen to work with everyone on this call, with these progressive partners who are on the panel today, and with many of you who are listening in, and of course with the UN General Assembly, the UN Environment Assembly, with UNEP, and with the UN Secretary General throughout 2020, 2021 and through to COP26, pressing for global action to deliver this green and sustainable recovery and the elements of cooling. And I just wanted to finish by recommending to everyone listening again the cooling guide that sets out what the and in the run up to COP26 next year. It's on the UN Cool Coalition website now, and we're really looking forward to working with everyone on this important agenda. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks again, Kate. And yes, I'd echo that. Please do join in the efforts over the next year or so as we work towards COP26. Understandably delayed, gives us a bigger opportunity to make the impact that the world very much needs. So look forward to as many as possible on the government and also on the non-state actor side, collaborating with the UK in order to make COP26 a great success. We had a few questions from the audience. I haven't got time to answer them. We'll take them offline. You know, can we carbon footprint cooling in Africa? What's the US doing on cooling? How can you collaborate? Please do join the Cool Coalition. I'll answer that one now. Can we share the data on energy efficiency jobs? Yes. Okay, we'll find a way of following up. Go to the Cool Coalition website and you will see that. So in order to make sure we leave time for the Assistant Secretary General, I just want to say my thanks to to everyone on the panel and the speakers before that who joined us today. And just to thank you all as well, the audience. Please do keep up your great work on cooling. It's an area of work for the climate community which people get it. People get cooling. I can talk to my mum about cooling. Like, people understand it. You talk about keeping food cool, medicine, keeping people cool. So it's a pathway to widen the work that we do, which is often very technical. So use it sometimes when you're trying to communicate what climate change means and the changes that we all need to make. So once again, thank you very much to all the panel. It's now my pleasure to finally hand over to Satya Tripathi, the UN Assistant Secretary General and the head of the New York office of the United Nations Environment Programme. Assistant Secretary General, are you there?
Yes, indeed, Dan. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. I can, yes, and over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the UK and all the partners for this wonderful climate week. I think we are at a time of such great urgency, thanks to COVID-19, that even things as important as climate change could fall through the cracks, because we are pressed with other important matters. And that is why it is so very important to keep our eye on the ball and make sure that we are on message and that we are highlighting the enormous challenge of climate change in the way and manner we must. I would like to thank you, Dan, for the excellent moderation. Let me start by thanking Lord Goldsmith for his championship. In the way, it was very inspiring listening to him this morning in New York. The fact that it is such a tremendous challenge for humanity should not be lost on us. The point that he made so eloquently, that the construction that will happen in the next 30 years and the cool coalition or the context in which we are having this conversation presents a tremendous opportunity and an equally significant threat. And it is the threat that we should be very mindful of as we make sure that we are productive, because sustainable cooling is critical, and which has become very clear during the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to thank Ambassador Christensen for the tremendous work that his government is doing, and especially he is a veteran of these processes at the UN. We had the pleasure of meeting many years ago when he was heading our climate change work from the Secretary General's office. And I would also like to recognize Secretary Gupta for the outstanding work that India is doing in not just in the action plan and his offer to support other countries that might see value in doing something similar, and not just from the perspective of the action plan, but how things are panning out on the ground, and helping a country as diverse and complex as India rise to the challenge of sustainable cooling. I have three key messages this morning. First is that sustainable cooling is critical, as it is already clear during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's about people's health and livelihoods, while also achieving the sustainable development goals and the climate goals all at the same time in the next 10 years. We know that the construction sector would be spending about $40 to $70 trillion in the next 3 decades, depending on how efficient we are or how what is the pace of economic growth. And we also know that the built environment, without exception, has come at a great expense of the ecological environment. And that needs to change, because we simply have no more forests to lose, no more ecosystems to destroy, because that will come at a very heavy price for humanity. We also know that from the latest IPBES report, that we are about to lose a million of the 7.8 million species that inhabit the planet. And we need to be a little more humble, given the fact that we're just one of the 7.8 million species that is causing such tremendous adverse impact on the world's environment. The dark side to cooling, as has been mentioned by many speakers, that the conventional approaches to cooling, they're already causing up to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions, twice those from aviation and maritime transport combined. And we need to keep that in mind because emissions from cooling are expected to double by 2030 and triple by 2100. And then that, of course, will be driven by heat waves, population growth, urbanization, and of course, the demands of a growing middle class. So what we need is sustainable cooling, approaches that are efficient and climate friendly. The second message I have is we cannot afford short-term trade-offs between sustainability and economic growth. They must go hand in hand. We must integrate sustainable approaches to cooling into COVID-19 responses. This is the best opportunity we have, given that there are these huge stimulus packages, and we have this short window over the next 3 to 6 months to make sure that COVID-19 responses are both resilient and they also integrate ambitious climate action. As the Secretary General pointed out recently, that while it may look very timely and convenient for some countries, given their own economic situation and the resources they are endowed with, to see coal as an option, coal is not an option. Certainly not at this time, certainly not a few years down the line. We really need to work hard to make sure that coal stays out of any new investments in coal or fossil fuels, stays out of new COVID-19 recovery plans. And then, of course, that will further add to more cooling needs, and we know the results already, what will come of that. And that's why we can respond to the needs in a climate-friendly way, leverage sustainable cooling to stimulate the economy, and build a strong foundation for a clean and resilient longer-term recovery. And the last message I have is a call to action. This event is about action. So let me close with a vigorous call to governments, the private sector, and civil society to make climate-friendly cooling a priority. Building virtuous partnerships that bring the best of technology, the best of intent, motivation, and partnerships at the grassroots with communities and civil society, working with sustainable finance, making money in the billions and the trillion scale available. I would like to applaud what Rwanda is doing in terms of trying to leverage the power of the community while providing the resources so that the community is not constrained by lack of finances, and many other countries that are doing this. So we need to keep innovating and finding new ways to ensure that our need for cooling works with nature and not against it. And as the Secretariat of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, UNEP applauds all its members, and we are committed to action and to sharing best practices, policy actions that can be including in stimulus packages, just as the UK government has done today with its guide on sustainable cooling. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General, for so emphatically summarising where we need to go from here at the end of this London Climate Action Week event on cooling. And I hope everybody will heed your call for continued action. Note the continued part there. There is a lot still to be done. So to everybody on this call and beyond, please keep up this important work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.